more. So welcome everybody. As most of you know, I'm Carol Leshy, President of the League of Women Voters in Deschutes County. And welcome to our first in-person, first Thursday in 2 years. So this is our experiment, and we hope to be doing this more often, where we actually get to have some time to visit with each other and get to know each other. So thank you for coming. First of all, I have a couple of announcements, and Mimi wanted me to mention that there are extra voters guides out on the table, so plenty of them. So if you want to take more than one and share them with your neighbors or pass them out in the grocery store or whatever, I have a feeling there are probably some people out in the public that need some help in choosing who they're going to vote for. And so I think the voters guide is a good way to do this. You can't hear me, okay. You know what? I must bend down.
Except for me.
Yeah. Oh, it's set for you. All right. Oh, I know. Okay. And the other thing is, don't forget to remember to vote. If you haven't filled out your ballot, you've got some time yet. Mine is sitting on my dresser while I decide. But I'm getting close. Anyway, the other thing, people not politicians. That is the state Oregon platform about redistricting and having trying to get rid of gerrymandering. And so that, again, got hung up in the Supreme Court, but they are going back again. We are, according to Norm, that they are going to file another initiative to get on the November 2024 ballot, in his words, to reform Oregon's dysfunctional and partisan redistricting process and replace it with an independent citizens commission for fair representation. So I have a feeling we will probably be out collecting signatures this summer to try to get that on. And I was kind of hoping Mike Dwarf would be here because he's also collecting signatures for open primaries. And then Mimi and Susan are gathering signatures for the commissioners. So we are not short on going out and meeting our members of our community so we can make some positive changes. So the other thing, I want to mention to Don, thank you for being here. Annie and I are both going to the National Convention in Denver, and this will be my first one after being a league member for many, many years. And thank you to Delights Trust Fund, or Delights, whatever it is, that there is money available to send us, and we would probably not have been able to go if it weren't for that, because besides the air and the hotel and the registration, it gets to be very expensive. So thank you very much. And I also, for those of you who know Frances Greenlee, she always sends me things, and I just love it because I never know what she's going to send me. So the other day I got one, and she says, a bit of personal history. I attended a National League of Women Voters meeting in Denver in 1964. John Anderson was the featured speaker. 1960, that's a really long time ago, isn't it? You know, and so here they are back in Denver again. So that's where Annie and I will be going, and then we have Minnie and Stace who will be doing it virtually. So, and one more other announcement, we have an upcoming event actually right here on Saturday, May 21st. It's an event that we are encouraging people to attend, and it is a soprano, Maureen Boy Popovich, and she will be singing 6 songs about the Equal Rights Amendment. So it should be kind of fun. There'll be a little meet and greet and then a very short performance. It's like only a half hour. So if you're not doing anything on that Saturday night, and even if you are, just change your plans and come anyway. So that is all I have. Anybody else have any announcements? I think we're good then, so I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
I'm really happy to see everybody here after 2 years in this beautiful space. One of the questions that gets asked most often about First Thursdays is, can the presenter share her slides? The answer is yes. They'll be coming to you within a few days. We'll be sending them out to the entire membership. And if you are not a member, please be sure to give us your email. We'll make sure you get the slides. Shannon has also created a wonderful resource list, which I think will be of incredible interest to those of you working on a future childcare study. She's included links to studies, so she's really put a lot of work into that, and I think people are really happy to see that. So I'm really happy to introduce Shannon Lipscomb. She's an associate professor at OSU Cascades. She teaches in the Human Development and Family Sciences Department. She teaches undergraduate courses in infant and child development, research methods, grant writing, program development, families, and poverty. She also conducts research and mentors students in research on early childhood development and early care and education and home environments. As requested, Dr. Lipscomb will be talking extensively about childcare scarcity and childcare deserts in Central Oregon, but she's really also addressing the important issues of childcare quality, staffing, and also children affected by adversity and trauma and how to best support them in childcare settings. I'd really like to welcome Dr. Shannon Lipscomb.
Can you move the camera and the
To move around too much. I am an instructor, I'm a professor, so I tend to move around and talk, but you're all stationary, so hopefully I can kind of stay in one place. And that will work. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted I've gotten to meet some of you as you were entering today, and I'm delighted to learn more about your organization. It's actually not something that I'm super familiar with, so thank you for inviting me. It's an educational opportunity for me as well. This is my first meeting. I am not a formal member, but that's something I'll have to look into, so maybe Mimi can help me with that. So thank you so much for having me. Let's see, so I'm gonna dive in, but the very first thing I would like to do is for us to take a moment to acknowledge where we gather, and that we are gathering on the traditional and unceded territory of the Warm Springs, Paiute, and Wasco peoples who have historically and continue to steward the land of Central Oregon. And so I want to honor and take a moment to acknowledge that we're gathering on native lands. Okay. And this is a photo taken from my parents' home near Sisters. So they have retired to Sisters, Oregon, and I grew up in Salem, Oregon. Spent time getting educated in Washington and in Colorado, and then have been back living in Oregon, specifically here in Bend for about I've been at OSU Cascades for a dozen years, but my son is 14, which means I've been here about 15 years. That's how I keep track of time now. Okay, great. So I was asked to talk about childcare scarcity. When I think about childcare scarcity or childcare deserts, as sometimes we're looking at, it's important to contextualize that within other issues that are related to childcare and early learning. So I have 3 of these categories for you. We've got supply, so that's really the closest related to childcare scarcity. How much childcare is there? And then we have access. So how do families actually access that care that is available? That's actually fairly complicated. And then we have quality. So we want to make sure what kind of care are we offering to children and their families. So those are the 3 issues that I'll talk a little bit about today, and they're interwoven and interconnected. So when we think about policy solutions or advocacy or issues that we might want to vote about, it's important to kind of think about these issues broadly, and there are many different ways we can intervene depending upon our passions and what the opportunity is at the time. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to start by introducing you to Oregon, which is the Early Learning Systems Plan that was put together by the Governor's Office in 2020, and they created this flower. We can think about it kind of like flower graphic, and the top petal is labeled Early Care and Education. And that, when I think about childcare, I'm thinking about early care and education, and that those things are happening, childcare and education, they're happening at the same time, because young children's brains are learning every moment of every day. So if we're thinking about providing care for a little one, we have one here, Cora's with us. She's learning right now through all of us. She's taking in many things. She's noticing your faces, your facial expressions. She's taking in language. She's getting a sense of community and belonging. There are many things that we're learning wherever we are as young people. And so that can happen in what we might call a childcare program. and might be happening in what we call preschool or therapeutic relief nursery. The situation for the child is the same, and the same for families, because families need access to that supportive care for all of them. So we call that early care and education as a system. And it's the top pedal of this broader network of how do we support the broader early learning of children and their families, because we have to interface with, you see health, you see the K-12 education system, housing, human services, and families have to navigate all of these different things to get their needs met. And we're working as a state, but also as a Central Oregon community to create systems that work, that are more centered around families. They work better for families. And so here in Central Oregon, the structure for that is what we call the Early Learning Hub of Central Oregon, and that's one of the links on that handout that you'll get, is the Early Learning Hub of Central Oregon, also the link to this Raise Up Oregon, where you can learn more about how collectively government organizations, universities, and many, many nonprofit organizations are all teaming up to try to improve our system. So for example, experimenting with childcare in housing complexes. So we're bringing together housing and childcare. Or for example, finding a way to bring mental health consultation and or nurse or health consultation to childcare programs, and doing developmental screenings that often take place in a pediatric office, but families are a lot of times not accessing those very often. Can we bring those to childcare programs? So a lot of different experimentation with how do we best meet the needs of young children and families. And that happens when we commit to collaborating across these different systems. So there's amazing work that's been going on for a whole number of years at the state level and at here regionally in our Central Oregon community. Okay, so that's broad framing. Then I mentioned early care and education was that top pedal. I've listed in a long bullet, part of the message here is just that there are many bullets. So there are many, many programs that are providing childcare and early learning for families in Central Oregon, in Deschutes County, and all over the state. And so what this means is we don't have a system that's like a K-12 education system. There isn't just your neighborhood school to go to. Families have to figure out what care is available, what kind of care should they be looking for or needing. Is that something that is an early intervention special education care? Is that a relief nursery? Is it a child care program that has particular hours? Is that an early learning preschool that might have a philosophy that's aligned with the way they would like their children to have experiences? Many, many options, okay? So it's great that we have many options for families. It also can be dizzying to figure out. So that's the framing. So then we want to ask, how does Oregon pay for all those kinds of programs, early care and education? Some of those programs like Head Start or Preschool Promise are publicly funded. They're funded by the federal government or by the state government completely. But most of the care that young children are attending is paid for by families. So you can see this is 72%. Almost 3/4 of the slots of the expenditures that young children are in, that they're attending, are paid for by families. So, and then if we look at these two, the government, federal and state government, most of those expenditures come in the form of tax credits. So just being aware of the ways that we're funding this early care and education system or set of programs, we have to keep this in mind, that this is the funding because this is driving a lot of the challenges that we run into. And when we think about solutions, we have to think about what changes could take place. This is one of the big areas that we can think about changes. Should it be that young families that are at the very early of their earning potential, that are just starting to get their careers going, should it be that they're paying so much of what ends up being a societal benefit? It's a question to ask, right? Yeah.
Do you, and I hate to interrupt, but I have to ask when I think about it.
Sure.
So do you mean that when you say families pay 72%, that families are paying 100%
to go, so they're not subsidized in their tuition or
It
whatever you
depends.
refer to it?
So if we go back to, oops, this slide, some of these programs, oops, wrong one. There's a delay. So the third bullet is childcare regulation and subsidies. So Oregon has the employment-related daycare is a state program funded with federal dollars, and it pays subsidies to families. So families pay a copay, a portion of their childcare depending upon their income. So you have to be, typically it's under 185% of the federal poverty level to qualify for some subsidy. And then depending upon your income, you might get most of it paid for, but there's always gonna be some sort of copay. And other programs like Head Start are typically free for families. All of that funding is coming from the federal or state government, but most of, this pie chart is looking at across all those programs, where do the dollars come from? And so most families pay all of the cost of their care. Some families get subsidies and a small percentage get free care.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Mm-hmm. Great clarifying question. Okay. Which way do I point this? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so let's talk about supply. And sorry, I should probably have, if I have a copy of it here, I have to constantly look up there. So this is a graphic. There's a lot here. I'm just gonna highlight a couple of things from this graphic. Sorry, Mimi, I'll try to keep connecting to our phone here. So Oregon has an Oregon Childcare Research Partnership that's headed up by my colleague Megan Pratt, who's over in Corvallis, and they have put together a ton of wonderful resources for you. I'm bringing you examples. This infographic is one of those, and so you can go to the website and be able to check out the infographic and a whole long report about Oregon's childcare desert. So if you want to learn about childcare scarcity and supply, that's where I recommend you start. A couple of things you'll see here. One is that the definition of a childcare desert. So that's when in a community, so we're looking at a county for a community, there are 3 or more children for every single slot of available, meaning there's a place for that child in childcare. So what you see here is that in the upper version of the state graph, each dot is representing a county. That upper one is showing that for infants and toddlers, children ages 0 to 2, every single county in Oregon is a childcare desert. When you look at the second one, we're looking at for children ages 3 to 5, all but 11 are childcare deserts for children ages 3 to 5. And if we removed public funding or reduced public funding, those would be dramatically more, okay? We would have, 8 additional counties would be childcare deserts for preschool, because we actually have a lot more public funding for preschool for that age 3 to 5 than we do for infants and toddlers. And that comes mostly in Head Start programs, and the newer Preschool Promise is a newer preschool, publicly funded preschool program. Okay, those are the main things from there. So then we can look at by county. So which counties are we talking about? Again, all of the counties are deserts for children ages 0 to 2. So there's 4 colors of green here. They might be a little tricky to see on this slide, but the take-home message is on the left is infant and toddler. They're either very, very much a desert or they're a desert. And then on the right, you can see there's that there's one shade of darker that is the deserts, and that includes Deschutes County and Crook County, our neighboring county, Crook County. Jefferson County, just north of us, is not a child care desert for children ages 3 to 5 because there's been quite a lot of public investment in Jefferson County compared to the population of Jefferson County, because it's a smaller population. So there are still lots of needs for childcare, for quality childcare, for access to care, but it's not technically a desert. Okay, let's see, what else do we want to talk about? So Deschutes County, if we look further into Deschutes County, so you might say, okay, well, what does that mean that we're a desert? How much do we have? We have enough regulated childcare slots for 22% of children ages 0 to 5. So we know for sure we need a lot more than that. One indication we can look at if we were trying to figure out, well, some families choose to have a parent stay at home, one or more parent. So how many do we need? The US Census data shows us that 62% have either two parents working or the one parent in the home is working. So we need closer to enough for 62% of our children. And so we have a big gap between those two things. Okay, so then we need to look at not just how much do we have, but how do families access that care. So we talked a little bit about affordability already. We'll talk more about that. But access is not just affordability. So who gets access to care has to do with affordability. It has to do with what hours that care is open and available to families. And it has to do with families' language and culture. Is this a place where I'm willing and or have the language to learn about, to communicate with, and send my child or my children to? Additionally, right, these are just three big ones. Then I started another list over here. Children's learning needs, very, very important. So are we looking at early intervention, special education? Are we looking at care that will provide therapeutic and or at least high quality supportive care for children impacted by trauma? Are we looking at care that's accessible by transportation? Are we eligible for the kinds of care that's available to us? And what this tells me, and what we hear over and over and over and over again, I've been working in this field for 20 years, and most of that, 15 of it being here in Central Oregon, is that families have to figure out how to navigate systems. So who gets access to care has to do with who can navigate the system or have support, someone to help them learn to navigate all these eligibilities and figuring out the hours and how do I get there, and it's very complicated. Okay, so hours, just a couple of quick thoughts. These are just some examples about how hours can be complicated. So a lot of times, even if we're looking at full day care, that might be open from 9 to 3 or 8 to 4. If we're lucky for families who work early or work late, we might find something that has some earlier hours. Sometimes we can find something opening at 7:30, and sometimes we can find something ending at 6. But what about families who work shift hours or evening hours or 2 jobs?
Or holidays.
Or holidays or vacations. Yeah, all of those are really, really tricky. And then I work with a lot of student parents who are navigating their work schedule, their college schedule, and their children's childcare schedules. So it's really hard for all those things to line up. Early intervention, special education I mentioned, and they're a particularly important case because this is specific care that's funded through a very particular federal funding stream that's protected. All children, regardless of age, in this case, are eligible for free and appropriate education. And so that actually starts at birth with early intervention and then continues in the preschool age from early childhood special education. And then in K-12, it takes place in our school system. But that is a protected, actually, a right of children with disabilities when they're young. So we have a really nice way to provide that access, but it's usually 2.5 hours a day for 2 or 3 days a week. So then families have to figure out how do we meet the rest of their childcare needs? Really, really tricky. And Head Start's getting better. We used to mostly have half-day Head Start programs. We now have a lot of more full-day Head Start programs, but they're usually closed on Fridays and holidays and those kinds of things. Okay. I am gonna share solutions at the end, just so if you're starting to feel a little frustrated and depressed, we are gonna talk about some new movement and collaboration, and you can ask me about, I've got all sorts of ideas about policy and things like that. In terms of affordability, what do we mean that care is not affordable? So these are also coming from I just kind of have taken things from the Oregon Childcare Research Partnership that is just a wonderful resource, and they look at the market price of care every few years. And these are data for Deschutes County. So I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry, I've got my notes on the wrong page. I jumped ahead of myself. We're gonna get there in a minute. Last thing on access to care is that families' language and their culture, as I mentioned, is really important in actually finding a match that will work for a young child. So if we think about care in the first few years of life, it's very different than sending a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old to school. We're taking care of a baby, a toddler, a preschool, and children. We need to be providing when I say need, I mean based on research, lots of research evidence, we need to be providing access to care in children's home language to support their language development. So children will learn multiple languages at once, but they will learn it best in their home language. And that develops a trusting relationship and an ability to engage and partner between families and teachers. We have very, very limited access to childcare that is offered in languages other than English. And so one example of some information we have about that is we can look at the percentage of the workforce that reports that says, I speak a language that's different than English as my primary language. And so the percentage of the workforce that responds yes to that is very small. And there's a lot of room for improvement there. So when we think about supporting the workforce, this is an area where we can really look at diversifying and providing access to higher education and training and education to people who want to enter the workforce or to stay in the workforce. Okay, so affordability, I mentioned, I was already talking about this slide. I was looking at my notes. Childcare is more expensive than college. So in Deschutes County, it's only slightly more expensive than college. So that's what this is showing here. And that's if, you have to say, well, what care are you looking at? This is the full rate for, on average, and in a center, a childcare center, for a toddler, okay? So infant care is more expensive, preschool care is a little bit less expensive, so we look at toddlers to just kind of try to look at an average, okay? And that price, $10,000, $10,800 a year, is equivalent to 45% of a minimum wage worker's earnings, which obviously they don't have laying around. Okay, another thing we can look at is our trends over time. So the price of care has increased 17% more quickly than the income of families with children over time, since we've been tracking it in Oregon 2004 to 2020. Okay, and this does not mean teachers are well paid. So it's just really tricky because the biggest cost is labor, because we are humans providing care to young people, and we need small ratios of adults to children, and it's just expensive. It's hard to do. And so when things are squeezed, what gets squeezed? The biggest chunk of the pie, which is labor, right? And so teachers are very poorly compensated. These are rates from 2019. They are a bit higher. They're creeping up because just like every other industry, we have a major staffing shortage, which we've all already had, but people are fighting for staff right now for sure. But there's only a little bit of wiggle room they can go before then programs have to start closing down, because we can't keep charging families more. They can't pay it. It's impossible. If there isn't an ability to just pass that cost on to the consumers like we can perhaps in some other industries. And what that leads to then is this is one of the big contributors to turnover. So we have about a 25% turnover per year in childcare workers in Oregon. We also lose programs, and we lose programs for a couple of main reasons. One is when staff are leaving and they can't stay open because they can't get staff, and this has been a big challenge in the last few years. The other is that it's just not economically viable for the program to stay in business, and that can be a center, and it many times are these family childcare homes. So we're also talking about, in this whole context of today's conversation, we're also talking about home-based childcare. So somebody who's taking care of other children, sometimes also their own, in a home. And that's a really important part of, especially for infants and toddlers, of this childcare environment. Okay, so this is what it looks like actually to access childcare, right? It's unstable. It's hard to align those gears and make it all work. And what happens is that I decided to just put the arrows pointing to navigating the systems. And I saw some of you nodding to this earlier. Oh yes, I remember having to try to figure that out, or I know other people who have really struggled to figure out how to navigate and get all these pieces together to be able to get care that meets our needs. Okay, so let's move on to quality. Okay, this is the area that I do most of my research on and have for many years. I'm happy to chat at length about any more of this. I'm going to give you just a very quick synopsis. We have to define quality, right? What do we mean by quality? There's quality we can regulate, and that's what's up here as structural quality. Things like what are teachers' education and training, what ratio is okay from a licensing perspective, what ratio of teachers to children, what group size, what kinds of policies are we looking for, and then what else I have, curriculum. There are many other examples here, okay? Those matter because they help make process quality more likely. So when teachers have more education and training, they often, therefore, have higher skills, and they're then interacting with children in a more developmentally supportive way. They're also engaging with families in a supportive way for families. So it's really the process quality that really matters to changing outcomes. And when we're talking about outcomes, for many years I was really focused on child outcomes. I still care very much about child outcomes. But increasingly, through much collaboration with others, I'm just really focused also on outcomes for families and outcomes for the workforce, which I didn't list here. So thinking about family employment, family education, family advancement towards their own goals in life, and then this concept of resilience. And so resilience applies to children, it applies to families, and it applies to the workforce, the childcare providers and preschool teachers that we're talking about. So super quickly in a nutshell, I'll give you just a tiny bit. I often do long talks, even 2-day workshops on resilience. So you can go on and on about that. But resilience, the definition here is intentionally vague. Positive adaptation in the face of adversity. The beautiful thing about that is it can lead to nearly any positive life outcome that we could dream of. It leads to health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, relational health. It leads to creativity, success in school, success in jobs, relationships, all sorts of positive outcomes that we can care about. And the reason that resilience leads to all that is because it's this process of adapting well given hardship. That's still vague, right? How do we do that? We nurture it through relationships, and we know that we can nurture this in every single human being because it's innate within us, but it has to be nurtured. So our work in early care and education is to find ways to nurture the internal resilience of young children and of families and of the care providers. Okay, so how do we do that? There's 3 general categories we can look at. And early care and education nurtures all of these. When we're doing quality, stable, accessible, affordable childcare, we are nurturing resilience in all 3 of these areas. We're nurturing children's individual skills and perspectives, their school readiness, their self-regulation, their confidence, their persistence, their motivation. We are nurturing relationships, which are really the heart and center of all resilience processes. Relationships between children, between families and teachers, between children and teachers, all of that. And we're building a broader community, and we're bringing in resources, like I mentioned, that connection between housing and childcare, or between mental health and childcare, or early intervention screening within childcare. When we're building those resources and connection, we're creating a sense of belonging for the children in that care, but also for the teachers who are no longer feeling alone taking care of children, and for the families who now have a network and know where to go to get their needs met. So we're doing all of this when we're doing high quality care. This is why I care so much about this stuff. How do we measure it? We have these quality rating and improvement systems throughout all of the United States, and I think all of our territories now as well. We call them QRIS for short. Oregon's has this cute short name, SPARK. It doesn't stand for anything. It's just called Spark, and you can find out more about that on the website. And Spark, like most other QRIS systems, they measure 5 domains. So the first one is children's learning and development, and that includes 12 specific standards. So lots of different things related to learning environments, related to curriculum, related to interactions, that process quality. Okay, I've been provided just a couple of examples. So one, right, these are things we have to be able to measure and provide evidence of. And Oregon uses a portfolio system. So programs put together a portfolio of pictures and documents and all sorts of things. One, for example, easy to document that we have a written philosophy. How closely is that related to children's actual experience? Hard to say. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So we have to have lots of different indicators so that overall, when we package it all together, we can have some assurance that this is quality care. And you might ask, okay, well, do we actually know that it is? So a few years ago, actually more than a few now, during the Obama administration, there was a Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge where states could apply for, I don't remember how much, a lot of public funds to increase access to quality childcare. The string attached was that we had to have a QRIS at the center of that to measure care and also to improve quality. And we had to validate that with research. So I was able to team up with a couple of other researchers in partnership with the Early Learning Division, and we studied our QRIS, an earlier version of Spark, and we did find that programs that were rated higher on the Quality Rating Improvement System, it's a 5-star system, that programs rated higher did provide higher quality teacher-child interaction. So that was exciting, and there was some indication of that children's engagement was higher as well in those settings, and family engagement too. So there's a lot more we can do to improve these systems, but they're a good start. They give us somewhere to begin, and then we can iterate and improve from there. And so one of the areas that we're really iterating and improving in right now in Oregon and across the country is, what does quality mean if we center culture and or language? It's not going to mean the same thing. We're not all going to care about the exact same thing, but we're all humans, and we know that brain development happens through close interactions, the sensitive, responsive, high quality interaction. But how do we get that in a portfolio of things, right? What do we document in order to expect that that will start happening? That might be different across different cultures, and so we have to figure out, how do we meet those needs? And that's a big question for the field right now. Okay, let's see. Is that it on quality? Oh, workforce. This is how many programs are participating in the QRIS and how many of them are rated. So for Deschutes County, this is a lot of numbers. The main things, because I took this, I screenshotted from their website. So in the lower left, you see this is the number of licensed programs. There are many different categories, 153 licensed programs. This is taken from 2021. 29 of them were rated 3 through 5. That doesn't mean that all the rest are not high quality, but that means they're either not yet participating or they haven't got that really laborious portfolio filled out yet, because it takes a lot of work, a lot of work to do that. So at this point, with kind of a cursory indication, 19%, so about 20% of licensed programs are rated at a 3 through 5. So we definitely want to see that higher, but again, it doesn't mean that all the rest of the care is low quality that's out there, but there certainly is plenty of lower quality care happening. Okay, workforce. So I mentioned what really matters is that teacher-child interaction and that teacher-family engagement. So teachers, right? Teachers really, really matter. Teachers and assistant teachers and directors, the people that are doing the work. I already talked about compensation, so we can look on the right-hand side of this infographic if you can see it. Education. So this is something, of course, at OSU we think a lot about, as well as our partners at Central Oregon Community College. And for a number of reasons, the percentage of the workforce that has a bachelor's degree or higher is quite low. So even in centers where there's a much more formal program, we're seeing 38% here, and this is Deschutes County. they're similar to the state, similar rating or similar levels. And then in those larger home-based programs, so it's lower, but about 30% have a bachelor's degree or higher. And then small home-based programs, and that's where we're taking care of just a few kids in our home. Very few people providing care that way have a bachelor's degree or higher. So why is that? Well, we look at wages, right? Does it make sense? Do we have access to paying for college and or spending the time, even if we get scholarships? It's really tricky to dedicate that much time to higher education if then we're gonna be earning very little money, right? Really challenging, which means the people doing this work, they're so passionate. I got to spend time with them last weekend at the Early Learning Conference that's held on CSEC's campus every year. And we had a whole room full of people from all over the region working in lots and lots of different programs. They were providing their input to new initiatives that I'm going to tell you about, and they're so knowledgeable, they're so passionate about this work, and they're really stressed out, and they're really overwhelmed. And I asked them about wellness, and they had a lot of things to tell me about their wellness and barriers to their wellness and what they need. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about collaborative solutions. So this is what I want to leave you with. Just going to do a quick time check. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for questions. I'm going to run through this quickly. We can talk more about any of this. We can follow up more about it. I had to leave things out because there's so much happening. It's actually a really exciting time in early learning. There are lots of challenges, but there's a huge opportunity in our community, Central Oregon. People are paying attention to childcare who never have before. We are getting funding in a way that we never have before. So it's really exciting. So we need people like you who are interested, engaged, have networks of other people that you connect with, that you can be an ambassador for whatever aspects of this are speaking to you, right? The broader issue or particular parts, the workforce stuff or the quality stuff or the family access or the culture and language, whatever is fitting for you, try to take that message home. So keep that in mind behind all of this. During the pandemic, we launched Little Beeves childcare on campus due to just emergent need for childcare when students and staff were trying to do work and school and family and childcare all at the same time in the same space, and it's impossible with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. Case in point. Welcome, Cora. Thank you for being our illustration today. And there's been some really fantastic public funding, and some of this has come through federal grants, and some of this is local funding. And you can see the number of logos up here. So lots and lots of organizations working together. So Central Oregon Community College, Better Together, OSU Cascades, East Cascade Works, who am I leaving out? Neighbor Impact, the Sheets County Ben Chamber. The Ben Chamber actually started just by providing space for conversations for task forces to begin. And that actually started a lot of really powerful work that's led to funding, at least short-term. Right now we have short-term funding. I want to stress that. We need sustainable funding, but we have short-term funding to launch some new initiatives and try some things out, which is really exciting. One of those things that we're just launching, actually we have a press release today, and have an interview with a reporter from KLCC Radio in about half an hour and 45 minutes about this, the Early Childhood Career Development Program. So we have funding for 2 years for this right now, and we're gonna experiment with it, but we know we're gonna need to sustain it. And this is a partnership with OSU Cascades, Central Oregon Community College, to provide it's equivalent of about a year's tuition, if we're looking at OSU, about a year tuition, and paid internship and or work experience along the way. So it's a fantastic opportunity for people either who are interested in entering the profession or people who've been working in the field. You saw very few people have bachelor's degrees, right? So it's also for people working in the field to come back to school part-time or full-time and get that paid for and get some paid work experience along the way. So please spread the word about it. The links are all on your handout to get all this stuff you'll have access to. And share it with anyone and everyone that you know. The more that we use up every single dollar and slot from these kinds of programs, the easier it will be to go after more funds. So that's something happening. Coming soon, Little Kids. Little Kids is going to be an expansion of Little Beeves. There have been some news articles about it. It is super exciting. So we are expanding from a temporary kind of emergent childcare program to more of an intentional lab school type approach, but it's very different than what you might have thought about like a childcare lab school on a university campus. So it's collaborative with all those agencies that we talked about earlier, as well as St. Charles Health. So we're planning right now for 2 sites, one on the OSU Cascades campus, in partnership with COCC as well, to serve both groups of students and community, and a site out east at the on the St. Charles campus, and they'll have extended hours because we know very much that the needs of the workforce at the hospital are for extended hours. And so it's very exciting, and we're doing things like trying to figure out, we're working with early intervention special education to say, okay, might we partner together so that if you have funds for high intervention support care for 2.5 hours, but we know a lot of those families need full day care, can we partner together on site to provide that and do it and develop a model to fund it, to braid different kinds of funding together that then could be replicated in other places throughout our region and other places and beyond that. So when I say lab, that's what I mean. It's like we're not experimenting on the children. We're like an innovation lab of how do we do this better together. Okay, Roots of Resilience is a program I've got some information about here on the left side of the table. You can learn more about this program. It's professional learning and support for early childhood educators focused on trauma and resilience. So the message here is that we want to take a trauma-informed approach. We don't have to know which children have trauma or what kind of trauma. It's a way of engaging with children and their families that builds empathy and connection, and we view children's behavior as signals of their needs. So we see a child communicating to us through their behavior, not just using their words to tell us what they need, but we look at their behavior. So we could talk, again, for many hours about that. We've developed an online course, video-based coaching, and then because there's been so much demand and interest from the local community for workshops, we created workshops, and then we made those virtual workshops during the pandemic. We translated them into Spanish, and then because there's been also, again, just community need and request for something to give to parents or to use as part of parent education programs, or for providers to use with conversations with parents about resilience, we created these info sheets. So there's 3 of them, it's a series, and I have copies of them up here. So if you're someone who has parents or providers, anyone working with young children in your life, please take a copy or multiple copies of these. And if you have access to lots of parents or providers, let me know, and we'll see if we can get you more copies, or if we can collectively work together to find funds for them. So we have some funding. We printed an initial 2,000 of them, I think, but they're starting to, my stack is dwindling because they are very popular. They're also free to download though. So these links that are on here and are on your handout, totally free to download. We created them, our Roots of Resilience team, we teamed up with a group out of Malheur County. A couple of people from the community came to a workshop I was giving in Sun River, and they thought, oh, we need to do this resilience work in our county, in Malheur County, and they have an OSU extension person. She's a faculty member extension who lives in Malheur County, and they went to her and said, hey, Barbara, do you know this person? Do you know Shannon Lipscomb? Can we bring this work here? And Barbara didn't know me, but she connected with me, and now we're partners, and we've been working together for years. And so together with their community, we created these handouts. And so there's Spanish on one side, English on the other. So the one on the right-hand side is in Spanish, if you hadn't noticed that yet. And they're here, there's copies of them here for you. And then the final thing that I just wanted to share with you is that there's this really exciting systems initiative. We call it ELSI for short, Early Learning Systems Initiative, that's in partnership with the Oregon Early Learning Division, which is part of the Oregon Department of Education. It's about to become its own department, but that part probably doesn't matter for this conversation. They, some folks from their Early Learning Division came to OSU about 1.5 years, 2 years ago and said, hey, you have a lot of experts in early childhood collectively across Cascades and Corvallis. Could we work with you, because we really have to fix the professional development system for our workforce. We know that coaching works better than just a one-time training. We don't have a system for coaching. And those coaches that we have started hiring and supporting in our publicly funded programs like Head Start or Preschool Promise, they're funding and providing jobs for people to coach teachers. They don't have training in coaching, there's no certification in coaching, and they don't have any mentors or people to go to that have been coaches before that they can work with. So we're developing this mentor coaching framework for and with the state, and also identifying training needs and gaps with a focus on trauma-informed and anti-bias approaches to that work. And then doing that in collaboration with all the other players across the state. So really exciting and fun. There are a couple of us that are located here at OSU Cascades that are involved in this, and that will be expanding as well, the Cascades, I don't know what you call the satellite of the ELSI initiative. So that's it. Thanks so much for your attention. You can tell I care a lot about this. I'm super pleased that you do and hope that you'll share it. My email's here. This is a link to the blog, the research blog. So I didn't mention with Roots of Resilience, we developed the program, but it was funded, the initial first 5 years was funded through a federal grant from the US Department of Education to develop and research the program. So we've been doing a lot of research on it along the way, including looking at outcomes. And so we have pretty small numbers of children and teachers who participated in the research, but the findings are really promising, that we are improving children's engagement and their learning outcomes. So there's one example of a research brief here on the table if you want. It's just a 2-page handout that tells you about some of that research. And there's more if you want to know more about that on the blog. Okay, I think that's it. So we have a little bit of time, but not a lot for
And I can
questions.
bring the microphone around. If people don't want to use the microphone, what we can do is, for the sake of the recording, have Shannon repeat your question and then give the answer. Do you want to do
Sure.
that, or would you like to use the microphone? I can speak. Okay.
We're loud.
Okay. So you
Go
guys
ahead.
can ask your questions without a microphone, and then I think just so we can be sure that it's heard
Sure,
on
I'll
recording,
repeat it.
Shannon
I'd be
will
happy
repeat.
to. Is it Annie? I can't read as well from back here. Okay.
So, you have a doctorate in early education, I assume, and so you know the history of education in our country.
Sure.
And what happened in our country that we decided as a people that we owed our children an education without them paying for it, yet children before the age of 5, we feel we don't owe them anything, and in fact there's something morally suspect about, and socialist, about paying for education and care of our children. Address that, please.
Big question. Thanks, Annie. First clarification, my doctorate is in human development and family sciences. So really all the different ways that we develop and become who we are, and my expertise that I focus in is on early development in particular. So my training isn't education per se, it is in early experiences and early learning. And that's really interesting, right, when we say I don't have a doctorate in education, because a doctorate in education means that I'm focusing on kids from kindergarten up, which gets exactly to your point, right? So some of that is because we look at, and this is actually historically happened across many communities around the globe, is that children are developmentally ready for a structured school experience around the age 5 or 6, 7. And that's when, first grade usually is around 6. We've decided in kindergarten, okay, we think kids can handle more of this learning structure and develop concrete skills like reading around 5, 6 years of age. Before that, we have a very different philosophy about what childcare is. That historically has been to support working families, working mothers in particular, and there's a big value judgment in what families should be doing. So when I got into this field in graduate school, there was a huge study done by, funded by the National Institute on Child Health and Human Development as part of NIH. And one of their big research questions was, what happens to children's attachment when they're cared for by someone other than their parent, specifically usually mother, with the assumption that it wasn't good for them, right? And so that study was actually really helpful in changing the conversation. There are many other research questions that were asked within that study, and I actually used data from that larger study for my dissertation. But one of the things that came out of that was childcare is not bad for children. It does not disrupt attachment. And it does need to be high quality. The quality of it matters. Yeah. Kim?
How has COVID affected these? Because I mean, you talk
Yes.
about the long term, and I'm kind of like, well, we're shut down for,
Right.
you know,
How has COVID affected?
your programs and the development, because you talk about
Sure.
the studies, but I'm like, how did you do that
Yeah,
during this?
Sure. Okay, so how did the pandemic affect some of the programs I'm talking about? So Roots of Resilience, our timing was so lucky. We conducted that outcome study just before the pandemic. So then we were spending some time during the pandemic analyzing those data, writing it up for publication and press releases and those kinds of things. Since the pandemic, there's more and more need, recognized there is more need because more children are experiencing trauma and there's more recognition of the need. And so since the study that was funded by the U.S. Department of Education, we've had some local sponsors that have funded some scholarships for the online course, some of our staff time to do coaching, and then time for us to do things like develop workshops and translate those into Spanish. So we've been able to, in a small way, sustain some of the early effort that the federal grant has been done for a couple of years. It ended before the pandemic, or just around the start of it. I also was a long hauler, so I was actually off. I was not working much for a bit, a long bit actually. So it affects all of us in so many different ways, and it's made all of these issues that I've talked about, it's just made it all harder. It's more complicated, but the silver lining is it's raised awareness in a way that hasn't been there before. So we do have a really important moment right now.
You were first.
Yeah, Don.
I've had some experience with volunteers, people that aren't educated specifically for some professional field, working in mental health. And I was impressed by the fact that I think some of your programs do take advantage of this. And I'm just wondering, have you found it possible that you can get people who have some free time, who are very concerned about trying to meet their basic goals, and would be willing to go through something like a 45 to 50 hour training program, and then work under the direction of someone else who is educated? But you said you need several helpers because you can only do so much with so many kids, and you need
Right.
more people.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, is that a resource that you found useful?
I think it's an under-tapped resource, volunteers. I would say a challenge that we run into in early learning, volunteers absolutely help, Don, for sure. And we do have programs like where oftentimes people who are retired from their career or their raising their families are ready to come and dedicate hours to volunteer and come in and do reading, for example, with preschoolers and or school-age children. That's really important. I think we need to do more of that, and if we have organizations ready to organize people and provide the training, yeah, I think we could do more there. A challenge is that we can't rely on that for ratio overall as in place of staff, because this is exhausting work that requires a consistent person over time for the child. And so it doesn't work to have somebody come in one day a week or a half a day a week to take the place of a caregiver. So supplemental, yes. And we do that with students. We often have student interns as an extra person in a classroom, and it absolutely makes things better for the teachers and better for the children. So I think we could look at doing more there. It's just not gonna be a substitute for the staffing challenge.
Thank you.
Sure. Elizabeth?
Yeah, so you may have covered this when I was chasing her. But did you address anything in the gap for folks who maybe don't qualify for subsidies but also don't make enough to afford childcare? Because that is my lived experience. Yeah, that is my lived experience, is that I had to leave my job because we made just over the subsidy amount but my entire annual salary would have gone to childcare.
Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate the case study. And you brought your child with you as example. So thanks for asking the question. Thank you for being here and what it takes to come and bring your child. So really appreciate that. And that first pie chart, when I showed 72% of all the costs, right, of all the expenses that goes in to paying for care in Oregon is coming from families, okay? And that's already considering child care subsidies and free care, right? And so your story, as you know, and as everyone knows here, is not at all unique. It's not even close to unique. It's very, very, very common. There is a huge gap. There still is a huge gap in care. A couple of the newer programs, Baby Promise and Preschool Promise, have expanded eligibility up to 200% of the federal poverty level. So you can make a little bit more and still qualify for care, but there's a giant problem with the structure of the systems. And again, there's the public education system and then there's early childhood, and they are two different things. And they're funded very differently with different value assumptions upon that. I will say that if we can change the conversation and think about development of for example, the workforce. So when I'm talking about early childhood career development, because the supply of childcare, in order to have the supply, we need more people to do the work, right? In order to do quality work, we need more people trained and educated to do the work. If we're investing in workforce development, we're investing in those people and their economic prosperity, because again, remember, they don't make very much money at all. We're investing in stability for children and families because they can stay in the workforce, because it would be a livable, they would have their education provided for. And then it's investing in the outcomes for families to be able to work and for children. So yeah, it's a huge issue. So workforce development and compensation of the workforce, those are two really, really big structural things that we need to fix. Karen, are we out of time?
We're at a couple of minutes after 1. I know Elizabeth has mentioned that, or not Elizabeth, Shannon has mentioned that she is being interviewed in about half an hour to 45 minutes. So do you have time for
Maybe one more, yeah.
One more question.
I have a question. I'm just curious. Who administers the qualifications of income and that kind of thing? Is that a real hassle for people to?
Who administers the qualifications for incomes for the different kinds of childcare programs? That depends on the system we're talking about. So for childcare subsidies, that is run, and most of them are actually at the state level, run through the Oregon Department of Education through the Early Learning Division at this point. We've gotten better at trying to kind of coalesce around that. So there's staff that administer that. Is it a labor for them? Yeah, for sure. We used to have childcare subsidies that families had to reevaluate and reprove their income. I think it was every 3 months, and we've gone to extending the eligibility. So different programs, sometimes it's once a year, right, rather than every 3 months having to go through that paperwork. And what we found before was that when it was, I think it was a 3-month, don't quote me on that, but I think it was a 3-month renewal, is that that led to a lot of instability, because families would not be qualified and then they'd re-qualify. And so kids are in and out and families were in and out. So we have extended, and we have research to show that that was happening. And so the work that the Oregon Childcare Research Partnership and others of us in higher education doing this work, Oregon's actually been fantastic as a state in terms of partnering with us as researchers and paying attention to, asking research questions. We have a roundtable every fall where we all get together and talk about the research we're doing and the research that needs to happen. And so there are pretty good partnerships and constantly improving partnerships between state policymakers and researchers. So that's exciting, yeah. And thank you so much for your great questions.
We would like to thank you, Shannon.